So I'm James Hewitt. I'm Product Director at LifeWorks by Morneau Shepell. A little bit more about LifeWorks. We've been supporting organisations by delivering employee assistance programmes that offer short-term intervention-based counselling for the last 50 years across 170 different countries. And what we're doing now is we're using technology to see how we can support employees much earlier in their wellbeing journey. A little bit more about me is I'm the proud father to 3 amazing and often very challenging daughters. They actually look very well behaved in this photo. It's not true. I think this is the one photo all year we've had all 3 of them looking at the camera. And for the last 15 years, other than helping to raise daughters, I've spent my time supporting organisations with designing and launching HR and benefit programmes. And today I'm going to talk about something that I'm really passionate about, and that is the importance of culture on the workplace. And when we talk about culture, we have to talk a lot about environment. And actually there was a study on physical environment and the effects it has on our happiness conducted by the London School of Economics. And it was the largest study ever conducted. And what they found is that we are happiest when we're in natural environments, specifically wetlands. And we're actually least happiest when we're in bed sick, which makes sense. But our second least happiest place, second only to being in bed sick, is actually when we're at work. And it's a bit of an issue because I don't know about the rest of you, but I'm not often in wetlands, but I am often at work. And physical environment aside, your culture that you work in is also part of your environment. I think about culture as being the atmosphere of your workplace. And we want that atmosphere to be one that supports growth and life, and not an atmosphere made up of 90% sulfuric acid. And actually, when we think about culture, it's good to start with, well, what is culture and how does it impact on employee engagement? And there's lots of different definitions of both terms, but my favourites, because of simplicity, and I like simplicity, are workplace culture is the way we do things around here, and employee engagement is how we feel about the way we do things around here. Because actually, people make decisions, not in a group situation, they make decisions by themselves every single day, multiple times. And they make those decisions based on what they think the collective would do and based on what the culture allows. So if you've got a culture that really focuses on short-term decision making, hitting targets, not necessarily how you get there, then maybe you're going to have a culture that looks a bit like this. Now, for those of you who don't know, this is Nick Leeson, the infamous rogue trader, who managed to hide losses over 3 years of $1.4 billion that led to the collapse then of Barings Bank, his employer. Now, you could argue that Nick Leeson is a lone wolf and that in any organisation there are going to be bad apples and outliers, but it's the culture that allows these people to operate in this way. It's the culture that doesn't hold these people to account. And it was that culture that led to the end of a 200-year-old organisation in Barings Bank. So what makes a good culture? Well, I've been very lucky in my career to have worked with over 100 different organisations in the private, public and voluntary sector. And it's given me a great insight into many different cultures. And when it comes to really creating a high-performing culture, then actually I believe there are 3 key aspects. And the first one I'd like to talk about is safety. So we've moved beyond safety being purely about physical safety and feeling safe from harassment or bullying, although that's still extremely important. And now we're talking about psychological safety. So the ability to be myself, the ability to raise my opinion and to feel it's valued, and also to challenge anybody or anything. And it's an area we still need to do a lot more work on. In fact, there have been studies in organisational silence, as it's called, and they found that 50% of workers haven't raised an idea or challenged an established convention because they were too afraid. And actually that number increases to 75% in the pharmaceutical sector and the financial services. In fact, Nick Leeson, our infamous rogue trader, even attributed a culture at Barings Bank of people not wanting to ask questions in case they looked stupid as allowing him to get away with it so long. People knew he was taking too large risks and that the results were too good to be true, but they didn't want to look stupid, so they didn't say anything. And so it's really important to create this culture where people feel valued and where they feel able to raise their ideas and their opinions. You're probably wondering what a banana and KPMG have in common, and I'm not doing any kind of play on the state of the audits in the UK. It's because KPMG actually have an initiative called Brave Banana, which I know isn't the type of name you'd expect from KPMG. But what they do is they actually get a question from one of their largest customers, which could be a supermarket chain who wants to know how to encourage their customers in bringing more bags. And what they do is KPMG post this question on the Brave Banana tool, and then any employee at the organisation at any grade, any level, can come up with ideas and solutions. And then everyone else can upvote those solutions, and then the top 3 actually get presented to the client. So creating this culture where everybody's ideas are valuable is really important. I'd love to live in a corporate world where we don't have to have the anonymous survey anymore. And I think another key aspect when you look at psychological safety is you can measure it based on how much laughter there actually is within the organisation and teams. Because as humans, and we're used to being part of tribes, when we're in a group situation, typically we only laugh when we're feeling very comfortable, when we've allowed ourselves to be vulnerable, when we're safe and we're relaxed. And actually there have been some studies that have proven that when you're in that relaxed state, you're actually better able to problem solve and you're more creative. So again, a nice link between having psychological safety and an increase in performance. The next aspect of culture that I'd like to talk about is total well-being. So those organisations that recognise that by supporting an employee's total well-being when it comes to their mental, physical, social and financial health are key to allow people to actually be their best selves. And if you've got happier, healthier people, then they're going to be better workers. In fact, one of the key reasons that we still see people calling up and using our EAP service and speaking to our counsellors is around anxiety and depression. And that's very consistent across all the countries that we operate in. But it isn't enough just to offer access to an EAP programme, because typically those are used when people are at crisis point. It's why we're spending so much of our time and investment in how we create technology to help people much earlier in that journey. So as an organisation, if you're able to help people create more social connections at work, if you're able to encourage more physical activity, if you're able to educate when it comes to their finances, and also if you're able to help them build that mental resilience, it's really key. And managers play a big part of this. In fact, in last year's mental health in the workplace report, 8 out of 10 team managers said that their team's total well-being was actually theirs, the manager's responsibility. But only 3 out of 10 of them had said they'd had any formal training, which is terrible. We've got a cohort of people that want to support their team's well-being, but they don't know where to start. So focusing your well-being initiatives on giving the managers the right training, tools to support their team members is a great step in ensuring that your culture really promotes well-being. Could I just see a show of hands of anybody that's read the book Drive by Daniel H. Pink? Okay, good, few hands, that's good. It's always awkward when you ask that question and no one puts their hand up. It's a really good book. I recommend anyone going out there and read it. It's about what motivates us in the modern world. And in it, it talks about 3 different aspects. The first is mastery. So the ability to improve and to learn and to get better is something that really motivates and drives us when it comes to work. The second point is autonomy. So being in control of our own work, being able to work out how we're going to get to that destination is really key for us. But to be able to get to the destination, you need to know you need to know your destination if you need to map out that route. And it brings me on to the third point of the book and the key aspect I want to talk about when it comes to culture, and that's purpose. Once as a worker you understand your organisation's wider purpose, you can make sure that all of the actions, all of the decisions you take are aligned to that purpose. It's why we hear so much about purpose-led organisations being the big winners when it comes to recruiting talent. It's because they're able to clearly articulate why they exist and why they make the world a better place. We all know about the power of starting with why. I mean, you can't go on LinkedIn without seeing a quote from Simon Sinek about it. But what's interesting though is it isn't enough just to talk about your purpose. You actually have to be able to demonstrate it and bring it to life. And on this, there was an organisational psychologist in the US who wanted to test this theory. And what he did is he went into this organisation where what they were doing was raising funds to send underprivileged children to college. And they went into the call centre, whose role it was to cold call potential donors and create donations, which must be a really hard role. But they went into that team, and what they did is they split that team into two. And then for one half of the team, on a Monday morning, they actually had a recipient of the grant come in. And she spoke about the impact it had made on her life. The fact that her parents were so proud because she was the first person in her family to go to college. And the opportunities it had given her in life, she just never would have had before. And then for the other half of the team, they had their normal Monday morning weekly briefing with their manager. And then they released both teams onto the phones. And then after a few weeks, they measured the results, and what they found was that the team that had heard from the recipient made more calls and actually generated more donations. They saw an increase in performance of 170%. And then they replicated that study across different teams and different organisations and even different industries, and they saw that same increase in performance. And it's actually something we learnt ourselves at LifeWorks, because our development teams said they didn't feel very aligned to our mission, and our mission is to make everybody feel loved. So we decided to start an initiative where we wanted to show and share feedback from people that had used our service, that had got benefit from our platform. We wanted to make sure we shared that much more visibly, much more frequently, specifically with our development teams. And as an example, this was a poster that was put up above our water cooler just last month. And after this initiative had been in place for 6 months, we had another engagement survey, and we saw a significant increase in the amount of the development team who said they felt aligned to our purpose. And it just goes to show you don't have to invest a lot of money, a lot of effort, a lot of time in bringing your purpose to life. Something as simple as some posters or having someone come in and speak to people can make a real difference in how people think about working for you and the pride they feel for your organisation. But it does need to be authentic. So I'd like to now talk a little bit about Canadian Nuclear Labs. And they've had a really interesting journey as an organisation. They've kind of moved beyond just looking at well-being as being health and safety, and now they're looking at total well-being. I've also been talking for a long time, so to give me a break and probably you a bit of a break, I just want to show this short video.
Canadian Nuclear Laboratories, 3,200 people, really across Canada. So we're in Manitoba, Ontario, Quebec, and we have different operations that look into research and development of nuclear technology, whether it's for medical, biological, for power generation, so a number of different things, and we have a workforce that's extremely varied.
We work with nuclear fuel. It's experimental work, which means we handle radioactive materials. They have to be at all times calm and collected. And even though we have a timeline pressure, they need to stay calm and take safety first at all times.
We do work here, but we also have our family here. So to me, being part of the community is not just about work, it's also about family. And I've raised my kids here. To me, it is important to have that balance.
At any one time in fuel development, I probably have about 1 to 4 staff going through the family assistance program in various ways.
We approach the whole person in its entirety. So work-wise, personal-wise, mental well-being, emotional well-being, physical well-being, as well as giving this the satisfaction in terms of technical challenges.
Here on site we have a counselor that comes here every single Monday, and she provides cognitive behavioral therapy, and she provides tools to the employees so that they can cope with all the different changes and challenges that they're going through, both at work and at home.
When you have to work in atmospheres that are, challenging as well as hazardous at times, especially here, when you want or have to maintain fitness, it's nice to have a facility like this.
One of the things that CNL allows you to do is to bike in from home to work, so they also have a gym on site.
Beyond that, there are always lots of great activities that's held outside of work. So if it's hikes, swims, in the Ottawa River, there's always lots of things that people take the time to coordinate outside of work.
And the site is going through a really big transition. We're transforming really from a government-owned operation to now a contractor-owned operation. It's a big shift for our people, and it does add some stress to the workforce here because it's a little bit unknown to them.
So we're building the Business Hub, which is primarily an office building. It has a health center, a library, auditorium.
We're putting in buildings that when you walk in, we want to inspire the individuals that work there. We're setting a campus-like atmosphere so when people come to work, they want to come to work.
I believe that we are in a safe place, and we do have happy employees because of it.
And what I think is really interesting about CNL and their journey is the importance they focus on looking after their employees in totality. It isn't just about coming up with programs and initiatives to make them work harder or better or longer. It's actually recognising that if you can support their workers' total lives, their home lives, their personal lives as well, then that creates happier and healthier workforce, which is better for the organisation. Although I do notice there's a lot of wetlands around that office. So, potentially they've got an unfair advantage, but I do think it's interesting that at the end they talk about, because we've got a safe environment, people feel happy. And as we know, that safety isn't just the physical safety, it's being part of that community. It's having those shared beliefs and shared behaviours. And I think it's something that we within the industry have to continue to do, which is focusing on our initiatives on making people better. Not just looking at initiatives through the lens of how does this help drive up productivity, or how does this help us increase retention by 15%. Those will all come as a consequence of looking after our people and people being happier and healthier at work. I also recognise that not all organisations can build their own offices from scratch or have access to gyms or even on-site counsellors, but there is a lot that we can do that improves culture, and any organisation can do this. And that's by focusing on providing that really safe environment for people to be themselves, to be able to raise their ideas and opinions and not feel scared to do that. The other is looking at our employees and their total well-being, thinking about their personal lives, not just their work lives, and thinking about all aspects that make up total well-being. And then the last is how we can bring our purpose to life, how we can get people to feel pride about the work they do for us. That's really important. And then also I think it's also important to make sure we laugh along the way, because hey, that's going to give us some great creativity and problem solving skills. So that was everything I wanted to cover today. Thank you very much. I finished a bit early because I do talk very quickly, so apologies. So does anybody have any questions? Yes.
I come from quite a small company, and I've been able to take a lot away from the whole day in general because we can apply it. But do you have any advice for small companies, sort of 50 to 60 employees, and what they can do to make employees feel more comfortable and not being scared about challenging the managers? Because in a small environment, without the extra security of a process behind you to protect you, I think people are more scared to speak up in a smaller environment. How would you help a small company?
That's interesting. Typically we see, sometimes it's the other way around, that at larger organisations people are more apprehensive about challenging managers because you have a much more structured grading structure and hierarchy. That means sometimes people feel unable to do those challenges. But I think either way, it's about how you can celebrate that rebelliousness, but still that rebelliousness that is respectful. We do a lot of work with organisations like GIFGAF and Dr. Martens, and they've got this culture of being rebellious, but it's still very much, it's celebrated. It's actually celebrated that people have opinions. Even with somewhere that's has a very strong culture like Dr. Martens, they still recognise that we need to hire people who are from a diverse background. Otherwise, if you just hire people like you, then you end up with that kind of groupthink mentality. So kind of understanding the difference between hiring for cultural fit rather than hiring for people like me. But I think in terms of how you can encourage that, it is thinking about those types of initiatives where people are able to share. It's even thinking about, from a management perspective, quite a lot of times when managers have meetings, managers are doing the most amount of talking. And really that's not the manager's role. The manager's role is to do the most amount of listening. And so it comes down sometimes to educating managers that their role is to listen and sometimes to be the last person to talk. Because again, you have this issue with in any kind of group situation. You see it with when they do kind of market research, where normally when they have a team of people, even if it's market research or in an organisation, whoever talks first is normally the one with most authority, and then people that talk after typically align themselves to that thinking. So it's much better for the manager to speak last and just to let their teams talk, and also for those managers to know who are the people that normally aren't the ones who would actively go out there and give their opinion. And actually it's down to the manager to actually point that person out and say, you know, John, what do you think about this idea? Because sometimes people need almost that permission to talk and raise those ideas and to feel comfortable in it. So I think it is around, typically it comes from training managers to make their teams and the rest of the organisation feel comfortable with coming up with those ideas.
So purpose, really important. When working with large organisations, what have you seen as kind of the most effective way of really bringing purpose all the way through the organisation so people are connected to kind of a single purpose or a local one?
So there's lots of research out there about whether you could actually have a single culture in a large organisation. And I'm a little bit on the fence. I think you can have a shared culture, but I think you then also, with any world, you have subcultures. In the same way that, you know, maybe there's a UK culture, but then there's also very different subcultures depending on where you live. So I think when it comes to purpose, then what you're going to find is that maybe the overall organisational purpose is too far removed from certain departments, certain roles. So I think it's down to understanding, well, how can you create almost personalised purpose? And that's very difficult to do for a large organisation. And also, it's also very difficult to do, I think, top down, to kind of impose what that personalised purpose should be for each subculture or each team or each department. But really it's about how you empower either those line managers or those team managers or those lines of business in how they can clearly come up with a purpose that, one, resonates with the teams that they're working with, but also rolls up to the wider purpose of the organisation.